Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jeffrey Sutherland. I am a Principal PM Manager with System Center Configuration Manager and Windows Intune. And for today's session, we're going to talk about managing Mac and Linux and Unix clients through Config Manager 2012 SP1. So what we want to accomplish today, I want to put in context how Mac and Linux, Unix fits within the broader context of System Center Configuration Manager. I want you to be able to walk away understanding what the core features and capabilities are of each of the Mac and Unix, Linux clients that we provide, and then demonstrate for you the key features on Mac. And the key takeaways is just to understand that Mac and Unix, Linux is part of a broader commitment that Microsoft has been working on the past several years to bring true heterogeneous management support to our management products. And we'll continue to make investments in supporting these platforms. And with Config Manager 2012 SP1 and our support for Mac, Unix, Linux, as well as our integration with Windows Intune for management of mobile devices, we really are able to extend our single pane of glass management experience across the broad diversity of device types that you have to manage. So I'm going to start off talking about our Config Manager for Unix and Linux clients. And first and foremost, the focus that we set for Unix and Linux was on management of server management type scenarios. So we really focused on those core capabilities that you need for managing your data centers and for managing your Unix and Linux clients or servers within those data centers. So the feature set that we covered, we're really focused on those core capabilities, collecting hardware and software inventory for your asset management and tracking reporting purposes, software distribution, and given that we're focused on server scenarios, we opted to build it upon our existing package and program, or the classic software distribution that you're familiar with, dating back to the beginning of time for Config Manager. In addition, we provide endpoint protection client for Unix and Linux, and again, another server scenario focus. Unix and Linux clients does comply with maintenance windows that you configure on collections. As I said at the start, the solution both for Unix and Linux and for Mac is fully integrated with Configuration Manager, providing a single pane of glass experience. You manage these devices just like you're going to manage your Windows server classes as well. One thing, I'm going to spend a relatively less amount of time on Unix and Linux in this session, and the reason I'm doing that is tomorrow morning there's actually a second session focused exclusively on all of our management solution for Unix and Linux, covering Config Manager and Ops Manager and the other products within the suite of System Center. And so if you're looking for a really deep dive on Unix and Linux, I'll refer you to that session, and I'll do kind of a broad overview in this session. And then I'm going to focus more of this session on our Mac management. For our Unix and Linux, the solution is architected on top of existing Config Manager server roles. So there's no additional server components that need to be deployed. We leverage our existing management point and distribution point infrastructure using the MP APIs on the management point, reporting up just like any other client that you're going to find on Windows. On the clients themselves, the systems are architected in a way so that we provide really extensible capabilities across the breadth of Unix and Linux platforms. And here you can see the list of supported Unix and Linux operating system platforms. A few of them are asterisked with a caveat that support for those platforms are coming a little bit later this year, but it's pending, so we wanted to make sure that you were aware that those additional platforms will be lit up for Unix and Linux support coming soon. So now let's talk about some of the features and capabilities that we provide for Unix and Linux clients, starting with hardware and software inventory reporting. As I said, we built our solution on top of the existing Config Manager hardware and software inventory that we leverage for Windows machines. We've built, on the client side, we've leveraged the Open Management Infrastructure SIM server. That's essentially the equivalent of what WMI is for Windows management. We've provided a number of built-in providers for collecting hardware and software inventory using the SIM server interfaces. And the way we've architected the client, we have a generic client layer that's consistent across all of the platforms of the various flavors of Unix and Linux, and then individual providers that abstract away from the underlying operating system. And then for each operating system, there's a thin layer of platform-specific code per client that actually is able to take the MOF information that we send through inventory and detect that information for that specific client platform and report it up. And we actually map those classes and properties that we collect through hardware and software inventory to the Windows equivalent classes as well. And we do that so that on the server side, you have consistent reporting, you have consistent capabilities with regard to making query-based collections and leveraging the hardware and software inventory to make intelligent deployment decisions. And as with our Windows clients, we also will do both full and delta inventory for all these clients. So once we've taken an initial full inventory, then we only are going to identify what's changed from one inventory cycle to the next and only report up that delta, thereby saving as much network bandwidth and communication between client and server as possible. Software distribution, as I said, we implemented this on top of packages and programs using the classic software distribution available from Config Manager. And we largely did that because it's the most flexible one, but also for server class machines and focusing on server scenarios, there are a lot of capabilities that you want to use packages and programs essentially to automate maintenance script execution and doing these kind of routine processes that run on a regular basis. And packages and programs continue to be the best way to do that kind of non-application delivery type scenarios. Fortunately, leveraging our packages and program infrastructure, our software distribution, you're able to achieve many of the scenarios through software distribution that we don't have native experiences for, including OS deployment, OS update deployment, app update deployments, and then, of course, complying with those maintenance windows. So there are some features that you're not going to find for our Unix and Linux clients, things that obviously we hope to get to in future releases, but for now we don't yet have. There's no client push installation. Installation of the clients on the Unix platforms is a command line script that you can run, and that information is documented, and I've included a link in the presentation so that you can find the instructions for how to deploy Unix and Linux clients. In addition, as I said, we don't offer native integrated OS deployment and software updates management, but you can leverage our software distribution features to deploy those sets of content types as well. And we don't have settings management, or what we used to call desired configuration management. So we don't currently offer settings policy management for Unix and Linux in our current release. Because we're focusing on the management of servers and we've built on packages and programs, obviously we have not implemented the new application model that comes with Config Manager 2012. And so you're not going to find options for deploying Unix and Linux clients as deployment types in your application models. And along with that, we also are not providing any end-user-facing client UI for installation of available software. We're assuming that in server scenarios, it's predominantly going to be required or mandatory deployments of software and scripts, etc., leveraging packages and programs. And finally, we do not currently support internet-based client management for Unix and Linux. And that's all I'm going to cover on Unix and Linux. Again, I'll refer you to the session tomorrow morning that's going to do a deep dive on everything with regards to management of Unix and Linux across the entire System Center suite, focusing just exclusively on those platforms. Moving on, we're going to now talk about Config Manager for the Mac, and I'll have some demos here in a moment, so you don't have to just listen to me drone on and on. So our Mac, we implemented very differently from how we did Unix and Linux. We actually decided to build our Mac solution on top of our existing on-premises device management infrastructure. So what you're going to find is you'll be leveraging those same aspects of our hierarchy configuration for managing legacy mobile devices, be they Windows Mobile, Nokia, etc. And so those include a couple of additional roles specific for the process of enrollment, or the equivalent of client deployment for these sets of platforms. So you'll have to provision and install your enrollment proxy point. This is essentially a web server that clients will communicate with over HTTPS. The enrollment server that actually processes the request and for issuing a certificate, and we leverage Microsoft Certificate Authority to provision certificates that are then used for ongoing authentication. And then the rest of the infrastructure is all going to be common infrastructure that you have for managing all of your other clients. Management points and distribution points primarily. And with each of those, it's important to configure them with the option of HTTPS in order to allow these clients to communicate back properly. And as with Unix and Linux, we've really are striving to provide a single pane of glass, a very integrated experience within our console, so that as you approach management of these platforms in Config Manager, you approach it in exactly the same way that you do for everything you're familiar with managing Windows devices, Windows class devices. And we provide support for Mac from Mac OS 10.6, which was Snow Leopard, all the way through to Mountain Lion, including the 10.8.3 update that just recently was released. So the feature set for Mac is roughly the same as that for Unix and Linux, but implemented very differently, as I said. So the client deployment is done via our enrollment infrastructure for mobile devices. And so this does a secure HTTPS SSL connection to the servers to authenticate the user performing the enrollment, and then provision certificates that are going to be leveraged for ongoing communication between the client and the server. We're able to discover Mac clients using either AD discovery or network discovery. And there's some nuances to each of those, just the nuances of those two discovery methods in general that apply to Mac as they do to Windows. Hardware and software inventory is also supported. And once again, as with the scenario for Unix and Linux, what we've tried to do is implement it in a way so that in the reporting back to the server, we're mapping the same data back to the same Windows equivalent classes. So you'll be able to have a very consistent experience viewing and interacting with and querying for against hardware inventory and software inventory attributes about Mac clients. Settings management is supported for Mac. As I said, it's not supported on Unix and Linux, but we did implement it for Mac, and I'll actually show you that in a little bit. And then finally, of course, software distribution or application management. So for discovery and enrollment, as I had already mentioned, we support both discovery of Macs from either our network discovery method or leveraging our Active Directory system discovery methods. We are able to get richer data from Active Directory discovery. There's more data available to us. And in Mac, in some cases, through network discovery, the data it may produce false duplicate records because some of the data that Mac has that gets discovered through network discovery changes over time. And so in general, AD discovery is going to be a more reliable means for finding and identifying your Mac computers. And so our best practice, what we'd recommend, is actually doing domain join of Mac devices to your Active Directory, and that enables us to collect that additional richer set of information. Domain joining is not required, and setting up domain joining Mac computers is not as straightforward, of course, as domain joining Windows computers. So I understand that that may not be something that every one of you will be able to do at your organizations, but to the degree that you're able to use the Active Directory and join those Macs to the domain, you get richer information through discovery. Enrollment is all about establishing that trust between our client and the server. Enrollment for Mac is accomplished through a utility that you download and install onto the Mac, and then you run this utility, and it performs the task of communicating with our server, authenticating that the user who's attempting to enroll has been granted rights to actually perform the enrollment. That's a server-side process, which I'll show you here in a minute. You, as the administrator, identify which groups of users are authorized to enroll devices. And then it connects to our enrollment server by way of the enrollment proxy point, connecting over HTTPS, authenticates the user, verifies that they're authorized to enroll. Once that authorization has been done, then it issues a certificate. And you can choose to either provision machine certificates or user certificates for Mac. By default, we'll opt for user certificates, and there are some additional steps you need to follow if you want to go down the route of machine certs. But in general, we leverage a user certificate issued to the user who's performing that enrollment action, and that's what we then will leverage communicating back to our servers on an ongoing basis whenever we check in with the management point or the distribution point, either to obtain policy or to get content. The enrollment process right now, the utility that I mentioned, is currently also a command line similar to what we've done for Unix and Linux. We are hoping to make that into a wizard process in a future release, but for now it is something you need to run from the terminal session on Mac. Cert renewal is another one. Because we are leveraging certs, currently we do not automate the process of the cert renewal. So if your cert is about to expire or has expired for the client, to renew that cert, you need to rerun the enrollment process, and we'll download and issue a new certificate for the user. That also is a capability. Automated certificate renewal is a capability we are looking to provide in a future release, but the timing of that is not yet determined. So a little more about Mac client enrollment. As I said, you're going to download the client utility and install it onto your Mac. So that is available right now from the Microsoft Download Center. You can download it and then make it available on a server share in your network. And as with Unix and Linux, we don't currently have any push installation capabilities on Mac. Once you download the client, you install the CCM tools, which include CCM setup, using the PKG file that's part of that package we make available on the Download Center. And in that, the user then just provides their corporate domain credentials, and then we do a discovery of the enrollment servers. So we're able to look up the URL, connect out, and do that authentication. A little pictorial way of envisioning this. So this is how enrollment actually works. So user discovery is an integrated part of this, and the reason for that is because the administrator then authorizes which sets of users are allowed to enroll against our enrollment servers and into Configuration Manager. And that enrollment applies to Mac as well as to those legacy mobile devices, or for enrollment of devices in Windows Intune, through Windows Intune if you're going to be managing modern mobile devices of Windows Phone, Windows RT, iOS, and Android. So it's the same process for granting users that enrollment permission. Now, on the client, on the Mac client, the user would then need to download and install our Mac utilities. They then run the CCM setup command line utility, supplying their domain credentials. We send those up to our server. verify the user's identity, of course, but then also verify that that user has been granted rights to enroll. Once that has been confirmed back to the client then turns back around and issues a request for a certificate. We process that request and send it to a Microsoft certificate authority. So this is one additional piece of infrastructure that you may need to have deployed at your company if you want to use Mac management. If you currently do not use a Microsoft CA, you'll need to have one for the purposes of enrollment. And then we issue, again, by default, a user certificate, and that certificate will then be used for all authentication requests when communicating both to the management point and to the distribution points in Config Manager. One other thing, the slide deck right now shows those servers are internet-facing, so they're in the DMZ. That's not a requirement. You can set them up either as internet or intranet-facing, but the important thing is that the MPs and the DPs are set up so that HTTPS communication is allowed, and you choose an option to allow Macs to communicate. And I'll show you that here in a second as well. Like Unix and Linux, again, I had mentioned we have mapped many of the classes of data that we collect from Mac to the Windows equivalents, and you can see here the list of data that we do collect. Right now, the Mac hardware inventory is not extensible, which means you can't add additional classes to be detected. We have just these ones that we've provided out of the box in this current release. That is a difference from our Unix and Linux solution, where we do actually support extensibility of the hardware inventory you collect. And with that, I will switch over and we'll walk through a couple of demos just to show you what this looks like. Okay. So here I have my Config Manager 2012 site server, and I'm going to start by going over to the administration workspace, and I want to show you how to the steps that you would perform to set up enrollment. I've actually already got enrollment all deployed and configured, and I've already enrolled this device. Watching enrollment in a demo is kind of like watching paint dry, so I didn't want to have to make you endure that. But anyway, so setting up your infrastructure for device enrollment. There are a couple of additional roles, as I mentioned, that need to be set up that are specific for the enrollment process for Macs and for mobile devices. So you'll see there's two roles here that I've set up on my primary server, the enrollment point and the enrollment proxy point. The enrollment proxy point is essentially the web server that responds to the requests coming from the enrollment client on Mac. And then the enrollment point is the one that does the processing of the request for the certificate. It communicates with the certificate authority and then deploys that certificate to the client. Besides the two enrollment system roles, you do have to make a couple of configuration option changes for your management point and your distribution points. And so I'm going to take a look at the properties for the management point. And the key here is on the general tab for the property sheet for the management point, you'll want to select the HTTPS option. And it actually does indicate there that this option is required for management of Macs and mobile devices. And then, similarly, on your distribution point, you have the same set of options where you specify that that server will allow HTTPS connections and choosing one of the options that will allow Macs to communicate. And right now, this one is actually set up as internet-facing, but as I said earlier, it does not actually have to be. You can set it up so it's only on the intranet, but the key here is the HTTPS option. And that's all of the server configuration that you need to do for setting up your infrastructure to be able to handle Mac enrollment requests and also to be able to process policy delivery and content delivery to Macs. So now let me show you where to go to set up or to authorize individual users to be able to enroll Mac clients into your environment. So I'm starting from, I'm still in the administration workspace, and I'm starting in the client settings node. And you'll see here that I have two client settings policies. There's the default client settings policy, and then we have a special one for endpoint protection. If you're not already familiar with how client settings have been changed in Config Manager 2012, we actually have made it very simple to bring all of your configuration for how clients are going to behave into our console, and we leverage these client settings policies to be able to determine which actual policies will get applied on a particular client. And you can set up as many custom client settings policies as you want, and we'll override whichever settings you choose to configure differently for each settings policy. And the way that we determine which one is actually going to be applied on a given computer is we essentially apply them in priority order, and you'll see this priority column here on your screen. So the default policy, which is kind of the fallback, every single client will get the default policy at some point, is hard-coded to priority of 10,000. We're assuming you're not going to have that many policies, hopefully. And then my custom one is priority 1. So the settings that I've overridden for that one would be applied first. Taking a look at the default client settings policy, there are a couple of things I want to highlight. So we have enrollment, and then also hardware inventory. Again, this is bringing together that single pane of glass. The hardware inventory configuration is just setting up the same classes of data that you want to collect for Windows computers, and once that's set up, it'll apply to your Macs as well. You can, as I said, because we're leveraging the client settings framework, you can actually set up different hardware inventory policies for different classes of devices or different groups of users or different geographies, whatever's appropriate for your organization. And again, by leveraging those custom client settings policies, then whichever one is the highest priority one targeted to a set of computers is going to take effect. For enrollment, there are a couple of basic options that you have to specify. And specifically for Mac, the only one we have to do is down in this user settings portion, the lower half of the settings policy. There are essentially two things that need to be supplied. First is specifying that users who get this policy are authorized or allowed to enroll mobile devices. And then you set up what's called an enrollment profile. And here I've already set up an enrollment profile. And really, the extent of this enrollment profile is to identify which site to assign clients that enroll through the server. So to which site they'll be assigned for ongoing communication with the management point and distribution points. And then also identifying the certificate authority or authorities that can be used for issuing that certificate that gets provisioned during the enrollment process, as well as the certificate template that's going to be leveraged for provisioning the certificate. And similarly, and then in hardware inventory to set up the classes of data that you're going to collect. Again, it's just setting it up once for all of your devices, whether it's Mac, Windows, Unix, or Linux, for the set of data that we collect, which is the list that I'd shown you just before this demo. So since I'd already applied this on the default client settings policy, and the default gets applied to all clients, I don't need to specially deliver it. But if I actually wanted to only allow a certain group of individuals at my company to enroll devices, then I would have chosen to create a separate custom client settings policy, applying the enrollment options that I just showed you. And then you actually target or deploy custom client agent settings policies to a collection of users that you want those settings to apply for. So that's all the administration work involved in setting up enrollment as well as hardware inventory. So now let's take a look at one of my Mac devices. So I'm going to look under a collection, all desktop and server clients. And you'll see I already have my demo Mac deployed. It's already enrolled and it's being managed from this site. And as with Windows devices, you just need to view the hardware inventory as well as discovery data from the console. You're just going to launch Resource Explorer. And you get the exact same seamless integrated experience as you get browsing hardware and software inventory for Windows devices, as you'll see the same exact experience for the Mac data. So that's how you set up enrollment and hardware inventory. That's how you configure that. Moving on, we're going to talk now about settings management. And again, I'm going to keep harping on the theme of a single pane of glass. So we've integrated our settings management feature for Mac in with settings management or desired configuration management for Windows and mobile devices, etc. I'll show you that experience here in a moment as well. So you walk through the same experience, you interact with the same types of objects. So you're going to be working with what we call configuration items. Those are essentially your policy documents that identify what settings you want to monitor and what rules you want to apply on those settings. And for Mac, we have essentially two different options for the types of settings we can look up and configure. Most Mac settings, both for apps as well as for the operating system, are exposed through property list files or plist files. And so we provide support for being able to query and update any property that's stored in a plist file. The other option is via script. So execution in the Mac shell scripting, we can query for as well as configure settings through script. And I'll show you one of each of those. A couple of caveats with settings management. For our Windows devices, we do support both machine and user settings, as well as machine and user targeting of settings. For Mac specifically, right now in this release, we're only supporting machine targeting. And the settings that get applied will apply at the system level and effectively for all users of that system. So pictorially, this is how settings management works. So this is where we left off. This was after enrollment. We've still got our enrollment web proxy, our enrollment server, etc. on there. Those only are in the picture for the process of enrollment. So once devices are enrolled, those go away, and the client won't ever talk to them again until you need to renew the certificate. But for ongoing management, we're going to continue communicating with the management point and the distribution points that have been set up to allow Mac clients to communicate over HTTPS. So as the administrator, you're going to create your configuration items, your configuration baselines, and then you take your baseline and you assign it to or deploy it to a collection. Our Mac client is configured to periodically sync up, similar to the way Windows works. It's going to check in on a regular basis to ask for new policies. So when it does that, the policy will be downloaded to the management point. And now this is where our mobile device and our Mac management differs from Windows. On Windows, of course, for settings policy management, the entire policy is sent down to the client itself. The client does the evaluation of whether it's in compliance or not. The client determines what remediation steps need to be applied and takes corrective action. For Mac, we actually do that processing on the server itself. So what instead happens is the server asks the Mac to send it its most current configuration information for the settings that we're monitoring and managing. It'll actually only report up just the delta, so whatever has changed since the last time it reported those same settings. Then on the server will actually assess the settings against the policies that you've set, the rules that you've set for those settings, identify any remediation steps that need to be applied, and then send just those commands back to the Mac. So it's just a small amount of data being communicated back and forth on a regular basis between the Mac and the server. And then the remediation commands get applied to the Mac, and the Mac now, once confirmed, sends up a compliance report. And from the management point to the primary site server, we actually send a more complete compliance report. Because from the Mac to the management point, it's just communicating delta. The management point knows the entirety of that Mac's latest configuration and actually communicates the entire compliance report back to the server. All right. So let's take a look at configuring some settings policies for Mac. So remaining in assets and compliance, that's where you find our settings management feature, and it's actually the one called compliance settings. And right now I have already created a policy for my Windows clients. So you'll see my Windows client security policy. But I want to create one now that's specific for Mac. So I'm going to create a new configuration item and name it. And then for our configuration item wizard, you basically will choose the target platform class. So either a Windows device, mobile devices, which actually includes Windows RT, or Mac OS X. So I'm going to select Mac. The next step, you can actually, if you want the policy only to apply, for example, to Mac OS X 10.6 clients or something, you can actually filter this. I'm just going to leave the default of all Mac versions. And then the next step is actually to define those settings that you're going to monitor and manage for Mac. So I'm going to do one of each type, and I'm going to have to refer to my notes because you have to type in a bunch of commands, and I don't want to get them wrong. So the first one I want to do is I want to require that a password, that the user have to enter in their password when waking up from the screensaver. So I'm just going to say require password. And this first one I'm going to do as a Mac OS X preferences file. Again, the two options are plist or preferences or script. So this first one will be preferences. Specify the data type. So we've got, I know it's going to be returning an integer. And now I just supply the path to the plist file that I'm going to be querying. So, and the name of the plist file. So this one is going to be under library preferences and com.apple.screensaver. And then the key that I specify is going to be the name of the attribute or the setting that I'm actually looking to configure. And one important thing to be aware of is for Mac, the key names are actually case sensitive, so you need to be sure to type it in with the right mix of cases. In this particular one, the ask for password option is the one I'm interested in querying for. And now I'm going to set a simple rule for this. Give the rule a name. I'm checking the value. The other option is to check for the existence. So if, for example, the presence of a particular setting is all you're interested in verifying. And I'm going to say that required password must equal 1, which means that the password is required. And then very important if you want to actually enforce these settings, you do need to check the box to say remediate non-compliant rules when supported. I also want to report non-compliance if, in this particular case, if I can't find that setting. That'll actually tell me that I have a problem with my configuration item definition. And finally, I'm going to set this as a warning level. So in my compliance reports for settings management, it'll show up as a warning. Okay, so that's my first setting using a plist. And now I'm going to do a second one, and I'm going to actually choose a script option. And for this one, I actually want to enforce that the Mac firewall is enabled. So the setting will be firewall. We're doing script. Again, it's going to be an integer that actually gets returned. And now I'm going to just type in the script. And this is where I have to type a lot, so hold on, be patient. I'm sorry? I can't hear you very well. I still can't hear. You might want to either walk up to the mic, or if you can, or someone can pass it along. Oh, can it toggle based on whether the Mac is internal or external? The script can do whatever you want the script to do. So I would say yes. But what you'd probably want to do is actually have different policies that apply, and set up essentially use detection methods to determine when you're in the one condition or the other. And that's what I would suggest you do in that case. Anyway, so preferences com.apple.alf global state. And I need that same script essentially for the remediation. So that first one was just the script that you supply for the discovery of the setting. So it's going to look up the setting for testing the compliance. The remediation script then is what I'm going to supply now, and that's for actually configuring or correcting when the setting is not compliant. So I'm going to do write global state. And so I'm just going to, if the first script detected that, so the first script just grabs the setting and returns the value. This second script will actually set it to 1, which turns on the firewall. And last, I set up the rule for what the value that I detected should be. And again, I am going to look for a value of 1. Once again, I want to run the remediation script when it's not compliant, and I want to report non-compliance. So once I've created my configuration item, I now need to add that to a baseline. I have a baseline already created that has my configuration item for Windows, and I'm just going to add this Mac one to the same baseline. This way, when I'm reporting compliance, I can actually report a roll-up of compliance across all classes of devices. I don't need to have separate baselines for different target platforms, because the configuration items themselves understand the applicability and on which platform it's intended, and so it's not going to, we're not going to have any problems where we're attempting to apply a Windows policy onto the Mac, for example. Okay, and hopefully, all right. So I've already deployed that one, so hopefully I'll get this done before it actually kicks in. So let's switch over to the Mac. And just to show you that I am not doing smoke and mirrors, we'll just confirm that those settings are indeed not set. Okay, so you can see the require password is currently not turned on for screensaver, and similarly the firewall is reporting it off. And so I'm going to come to the Config Manager settings panel applet on the Mac and click Connect Now. So now we're going to, so now the client is actually communicating to the management point, asking if there's new policies applicable to this device. It should detect that our baseline is now assigned to that device and that there's a CI that's applicable for Mac. Okay, so it's now completed its processing. Now, for these particular settings, I actually have to log the user off and then log back on in order for them to take effect. And if I did everything correctly, firewall is now on, and require password immediately after sleep or screensaver is also on. So that is settings management for Mac. And that information about the compliance state at the beginning, so when we first checked the Mac, as well as the information that we successfully remediated the settings and brought them into compliance, that information is also being sent to the server and will be available in reports. I'm not going to demo the reports. I actually didn't set up a reporting server, but you do actually see that complete information about the compliance over time for the device. Okay, software distribution. Unlike our Unix and Linux solution, we actually have built the Mac support directly on top of the application model that's new with Config Manager 2012. So we're not leveraging packages and programs for Mac. We actually do support the predominant installation types for Mac, so the .app file-based distribution, PKG, MPKG, which are the kind of bigger packages that bundle a number of different softwares together, and then the DMG format. So all of those most predominant forms of Mac application delivery. What we have done, we've also provided a utility that you'll run on the Mac, on a Mac that has the package that you want to deliver, so that we can actually wrap it with the metadata that we need to be able to correctly populate and fill in the information in our application model. So you'll run this command line utility, specify the package that you want to actually deploy through our application management, and we actually produce a new file that has an extension of CMMac. And the information we're pulling out of those is the information we need to be able to detect that the app actually is installed on the Mac. Once again, single pane of glass, so everything's completely integrated. We're built into the app model. Reporting is exactly the same. Content distribution works exactly the same way. The Mac clients are going to communicate with your distribution points into management point, just like any other device that is communicating with Config Manager for app management. A couple of caveats for Mac in our current release. We did not provide any end-user experience for browsing applications. The implication of that is that our application delivery for Mac is right now limited to required application distribution. So you're not able to choose the available application option. But because we are fully integrated and leveraging the app model, we also take advantage of all the improvements in Config Manager 2012 with respect to content management in your distribution points. So the new single instance store, where we actually, every piece of content will only store once on your distribution points. In the past, if the same piece of content were contained in multiple applications or deployment types, then we would have stored separate instances for each one. Now we actually are able to detect that the content is the same and we store it once. And then leveraging our new state-based distribution point groups for easier managing your distribution points as a collective unit instead of one by one. All right, so software distribution. Where we left off, same server roles are involved as were involved for settings management. So the config manager admin would create the application, specifying each of the different deployment types. So for this hypothetical example, we're going to have a deployment type that's one that's applicable for Windows, which is an MSI-based one, and one that's Mac, so wrapped as our CM Mac utility. So we've distributed the content to our distribution points. The admin deploys the application to collection, and when the Mac checks in for policy on its regular schedule, it sees that it now has a new app to install, and then it'll communicate, again, over HTTPS with the distribution point, get just the CM Mac application package, and perform the installation. And then reporting status, just as with software settings management through the management point infrastructure. All right. So setting up a Mac application. For my example, I want to send out the latest Microsoft Link client to my Macs. So I switched to the software library workspace, application management, and applications. And I already have a Microsoft Link client app created. And it should, yes it does, currently have just a single deployment type for Windows. This is an MSI installer. So I'm going to add my Mac one. I have already done the command line utility to wrap and extract the data. So I just need to create the new DT, the new deployment type, and import from that CM Mac file that was produced. So create deployment type. Again, the same exact wizard experience that you do for creating deployment types for any other content type. And you'll see Mac is there along with all the content types for management of mobile devices through our Intune connector and, of course, for Windows. So selecting Mac. And I have my Microsoft Link for Mac.cmmac file. So we've now extracted the metadata information from that file. And now if I take a look at the properties for our new deployment type, and you'll see, so this is the information we've extracted from the actual installer for Mac, and we wrapped it so that we could actually populate this detection method. So you can see it's a fairly complex detection method. I wouldn't want to manually enter it. This is why that utility is useful. All right. All right, and so this is not deployed. I thought it showed that it had a deployment earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy my app. Specify the collection. Again, for Mac specifically, I'm going to do device targeting. We're not currently supporting user collection targeting for Macs. And I'm just going to choose my all desktop and server clients. That's where my Mac, I happen to know, resides. Sorry. So it already knew which distribution point was for that collection. Again, for Mac specifically, we're only currently supporting required app installation, so it's important to make sure that that you specify required on this page of the wizard. And that's the only additional options I'm going to configure. And so now at this point, the content for this application for both the Windows client as well as for the Mac client should be distributing to my distribution point, and the policy should now be ready for my Mac to request. So I'm going to again go to my Configuration Manager Settings Panel applet on the Mac and connect now. You don't always have to do that. I'm just doing it for purposes of demos. Of course, it periodically will check in with the server to see if it has new policies. And now if I did not do anything wrong, we should, here in a moment, see the application installation kick off. Yes? So the question is, how does it handle applications that require reboot? So it's basically the application will just will prompt the user for a reboot. The system will handle that automatically. You can configure the user experience options in the deployment for if you know that it's going to require a reboot, whether you give the user a deadline or a time that they can respond. So here I actually did have a deadline set. I just didn't bother to configure that option. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off the installation. And I didn't show you that we didn't already have Link installed, so just as evidence. So the question is, does the user have to be logged in? No, the user does not need to be logged in. All right. And we should now see that Link has been installed onto the Mac. And again, because it's now reporting back up through the management point success, you're going to see in your deployment statistics for that application, you should now shortly see that the compliance percentage here should creep up to indicate that my Mac is installed. It may take a little while for that to actually process, so I will continue on with the presentation. Okay, last but not least, endpoint protection for both Mac and Linux, Unix. Linux, I guess. The System Center endpoint protection for these client platforms currently do not have native integration with Configuration Manager. You can leverage Config Manager to deploy the SCEP client to the Mac, and you'll obviously be able to monitor the deployment and the installation status of that. But we don't have any integrated management of the anti-malware policies currently built into the Config Manager console. Platform support for all these are the same, at least for Mac, are the same as for our Config Manager. So versions from 10.6 Snow Leopard all the way up to Mountain Lion, and then for Linux we have a few different versions with a couple others coming at a later date. We don't currently support for Unix servers the SCEP client. The SCEP client for Mac and Unix was actually something that we worked with ESET to deliver, but it's fully supported and managed by supported by Microsoft. So if you do have support requirements or support challenges working with the SCEP client, you only have to turn to Microsoft. You don't have to talk to any third parties. And licensing for this, for both Mac and for Unix or for Linux, is through the CoreCal. So, hopefully, what you've seen is our Mac and Linux really are an important part of our broader strategy to deliver manageability across the heterogeneous management environment for all of you. We're going to continue to make investments in both Mac and Unix and Linux. So hopefully over time, some of those things that I had to keep caveating will disappear and we'll inch closer to having a true seamless experience across the board with full management support on all features. A number of different sessions for Config Manager. I also mentioned, I don't have it on this slide, but I had on the earlier one, the session tomorrow morning for a deeper dive into Unix and Linux. So for those of you who are interested, please attend those. And of course, we have a number of labs and other opportunities for you to learn more about managing apps. I think we might have a lab on Unix, Linux. I can't remember. We do. So you can also play around with these, get your hands dirty, and get some hands-on experience. Please be sure to fill out the evaluation. Let me know how I did. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your MMS.